Good afternoon and welcome to the State Historical Society of Missouri Center for Missouri Studies. My name is Kevin Walsh. We'll be talking today about the new exhibition, our collaboration with the Missouri Historic Costume and Textile Collection, Missouri Women, from Suffrage to Statecraft. Because of the COVID-19 virus, we've been unable to open this outstanding exhibition collaboration to the public quite yet, hopefully soon. In the meantime, we've decided to get some people together for a two-part program and take a deep dive into women's suffrage in Missouri. In part one, in a few minutes, we'll be talking with historian and activist Margot McMillan about the circumstances surrounding a silent protest for women's suffrage that took place in St. Louis at the 1916 Democratic Convention. In part two, we will interview the Missouri Historic Costume and Textile Collection curator, Jean Parsons, also collection manager, Nicole Johnson, and Joan Stack, Dr. Stack, our curator of art. There's a lot to say about this exhibition, and Margot's going to help me parse it out. The exhibit surveys the decades-long struggle for women's suffrage by highlighting the roles of Missouri women in the national suffrage movement and the trailblazing women in Missouri politics who opened doors for others to participate in the democratic process. The exhibit includes, of course, textiles and clothing, costuming from the Missouri Historic Costume and Textile Collection, also objects and art from our own collection here at the Center for Missouri Studies. Margot McMillan is the author of The Golden Lane, How Missouri Women Gained the Vote and Changed History. She's written other books on Missouri's courageous women. She's now retired after a career of teaching English composition at Westminster College, I believe, and lives on a small farm in Callaway County. As a farmer with deep interest in the local food system, she writes about the resiliency of local production and hosts Farm and Fiddle, which is the world's oldest radio programming focusing on sustainable agriculture. She's also hard at work finishing a book about the women who knew Mark Twain best, his mother, sister, wife, daughters, and others. She says, Margot says, after beginning to write about Missouri women, there was no turning back. It's the most interesting subject on the planet. Margot, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. And a big thank you to all the people at the State Historical Society for the many favors you guys have done for me over the years and for all of the work that you do. It's a great organization.
It is. You know, the exhibit itself is almost a timeline of women's suffrage here in the United States. It goes well back into the 19th century and well forward up till into the 21st century. We're going to focus on something that happens roughly about a third of the way along. This is something that I was unaware of until I think I learned about it from you, the Golden Lane, which was a really interesting protest, and it's a timely subject all of a sudden. It's appropriate to the times. Tell us about how you came to know about the Golden Lane, Margot.
Well, I picked the image of the book cover on the front slide here because that top image, which shows the women lined up along Locust Street in St. Louis, was the first image I ever saw. And I was at the State Historical Society back in your old location. And Faye Sotham, who was the archivist there for, gosh, decades, she and I were pals, and I was working on an article about Missouri women. And I had pictures of Josephine Baker and Bess Truman and, you know, lots of other iconic women through the years from Missouri. And I just said to Faye, I just want something different. What do you have that's different? And she just kind of tossed this picture out in front of me. And I gasped. I said, what is it? And Faye said, that's the Golden Lane. And looking at it and seeing these women lined up with their parasols and their sashes that say votes for women, why is this picture not in every book on Missouri history, every book on American history that's ever published? It was just mind-boggling to me that this event had happened without my knowledge, and I had been working on Missouri history for years at that time. So I just kind of fell in love with it.
Behind me, you'll see when you come to see the exhibition when we're open again, some mannequins with the actual cost. You know, I call them costumes. These are dresses that women wore as, you know, kind of a uniform of the Golden Lane. And what's striking about it is the color coordination, the white and the yellow with the yellow parasol. Was that intentional, of course?
Yeah, that kind of became the colors of the suffrage movement, and it happened kind of late in the game. The women in California, not California, Missouri, but the state of California, had a petition drive to get the vote from their state legislature, and it was printed on yellow paper. And so that was sort of where the idea of yellow and the suffrage movement got together, and it just sort of became the color from then on, yellow and white.
Talking with Margot McMillan about the Golden Lane, which was a really interesting protest that has all kinds of resonance today. Everything from what we just talked about, branding and colors when it comes to activism, and also just the being on the street and demanding action. Exactly.
And I'll just tell you that the picture on the bottom is Kate Richards O'Hare, and she was a well-known feminist at the time, and still I think her name is well known by folks who study this kind of thing or care about it. She was a socialist living in St. Louis, and she published a magazine called The National Ripsaw. And you know, I just think, gosh, if I ever get to publish a magazine, it's going to be called The National Ripsaw. What a great title. And she is lecturing in this picture. You can see her, and she's got her hands on her hips. She's standing in the back of a car, and all of this sea of men's hats in front of her, because there's no women in the audience. There's no women voting. And she is telling them what she's thinking, and she's a very forthright speaker, it looks like. A few months after this picture was taken, she was sent to the penitentiary in Jefferson City. So it was a dangerous job in those days to be a woman in protest.
This protest didn't come out of nowhere. There's been a history of women actively seeking suffrage here in Missouri, going back to the Civil War, right?
Right. Yeah, even a little earlier than the Civil War. I can go through. I wanted to just mention at the beginning that a lot of times when I talk to groups of people, they don't quite understand why it's important to talk about getting the vote. We have the vote, but it's a stepping stone, and it's sort of one way to get across the big ocean of injustice is having a vote. It's what gives us a voice. Here's what it leads to. We had 6 women, actually, candidates this last year running for the presidency. This has never happened before. We hope it happens a lot more. And then you sent me this picture, Kevin, and it's really become something that I love. These are women in Louisville, Kentucky, who are lining up to protect the people who are protesting behind them. You can almost see that the people behind them are Black men. It's unfortunate that we don't quite have a picture of who all is protesting, but these women are protecting them against, you know, really the police. So there was a great article that came along with this picture, and the line that I loved was, this is a line of white people forming a barrier between Black protesters and the police. This is love. This is what you do with your privilege.
You know, Margot, in Missouri, it was like when slavery ended in Missouri in 1865, I think a lot of women, or I've read, assumed that suffrage would apply to them as well. And they had a rude surprise, and there was a court case here in Missouri about it in 1868. What makes Missouri so active? I'm not going to say that you're entirely successful. We still haven't passed the ERA. What makes it so active? Give us some context.
Well, you asked me this question, and I was just bumfuzzled by it, to be honest with you, Kevin. But I've come up with a couple of ideas. One is that I think Missouri women are very self-sufficient. And during the Civil War, this picture of Jefferson Barracks, if you've ever been there, it's a massive cemetery full of Civil War dead. The men went off to fight, and some, as we've all heard, some went for the Union, some went for the Confederacy, fighting brother against brother. Basically, they were just gone. And so who's going to take care of civil society in that situation? And of course, it's the women that had to step forward. So the women were raising the food, they were delivering the food into town, they were preparing the food, serving it for the hospitals. They were doing things like making bandages out of clothes and blankets. They were finding jobs for all sorts of immigrants that were coming into the city out of the countryside. There was no way to find out if you heard of a battle that might have one of your loved ones fighting in it. There was no way to find out if they were hurt or not, or if they were killed, except in person. So folks were just flooding into St. Louis. This is a picture that came out of Harper's Bazaar, which was, of course, a popular magazine at the time, of refugees coming into St. Louis. And you can see it's a whole family, just floods of people that had to be taken care of. And the women are stepping forward to do that work.
I understand that there was a bunch of activism and important court cases here in Missouri in the 19th century, some prominent figures. You mentioned women in jail, which Missouri was very, very good at doing that, putting female journalists and activists in jail, and also the confusion of the Civil War. We've got all this stuff going on, and so there's a lot of frustration, and yet they're still very organized when it comes to the turn of the century.
Right. Well, we've got, the Virginia Minor case. You said a little bit about that, Minor versus Happersett, which was, Virginia Minor was real active during the Civil War, organizing women and taking care of society, as we've said. And she just was one of the people that assumed that the vote would be given to women at this time. When it wasn't, they went to court. She and her husband went to court and followed it all the way to the Supreme Court, which was actually argued at the courthouse here in St. Louis. Basically, the Supreme Court said that women are citizens, they can pay taxes, but they can't vote. So Virginia Minor immediately went, I was going to talk about her clothes a little bit, since we're talking about fashion. You can see from the image that she has on a black dress. Well, if you could see the whole person, you would probably see, maybe not because she's older here, but when she was a younger woman especially, a real wasp waist. Her waist is very squished together. And she takes tiny little steps because she has all these clothes on. And the next slide is a little bit graphic. I know you might have to turn away, Kevin, but I think it's really important for us as consumers of fashion to understand what people have put up with through the years. So this is a picture from a doctor's diagram of what's going on with the women's internal organs when they have the corset on, and how their rib cages are bent and their digestive system is completely bent up and compromised.
I'm looking here in the exhibition at some of the 19th century outfits that you're talking about. So I mean, see them tonight.
It's style, no question about it, but it was a style that was very constrictive to women. In Virginia Minor's case, since she was a woman especially, she was not able to argue her own case in court. Her husband did it for her. I just wanted to mention too that in 2014 there was a bust of Virginia Minor installed at the state capitol, and in the Hall of the Missourians, Hall of Famous Missourians. There are 46 Missourians in that hall, and then 8 of them are women. And I would almost argue that Virginia Minor is the most serious of all of the women. A lot of them are sort of World War II, you know, calendar girls. But yeah, Virginia Minor got in there in 2014.
As we approach the 20th century, you know, I mentioned that they seem to hold it together. Actually, they seem to refine their tactics, and there was as I guess what I conjecture is that it was seeping into popular culture. I mean, there was music being written about suffragism. There was, you know, this was becoming talked about, and it was getting a little bit of press, a little bit of traction, as we'd say these days, when the 20th century dawns, right?
Yeah, yeah. There was a very deep understanding of what was appropriate for women and what wasn't, and it was the women's sphere and the men's sphere. And the women's sphere had to do with homemaking, being at home. The men's sphere had to do with politics and business and things that produced income. So you are correct that as things changed, as things moved along going into the 20th century, there was more and more curiosity about what women could actually do, sort of left over from the Civil War. And then there was curiosity on the women's part of what was going on. This, I don't know if you can see this cartoon, but here's the cartoonist image of a woman looking over the wall that says the woman's sphere. And the caption has to do with if all she can do is stay home with the babies, she's just going to be, her mind is going to be full of frivolous manners like fashion and homemaking and that kind of thing. If you give her the vote, she'll be more serious and have more to do with her brilliant mind. And so the bottom panel of this cartoon is her voting.
We have questions piling up, and we'll get to them at the end of my discussion here with Margot. Okay. We're talking about the Golden Lane, which was extraordinary protest that took place. It was Locust Street in St. Louis, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It was stretched between the men's hotel. It was on the day of the Democrat convention, and it was a line of women, 3,000 women and a couple hundred men, who were stretched from the entrance of the Jefferson Hotel where the men were staying all the way to the convention center. So it was a couple of miles long, and these women were standing shoulder to shoulder. You know, if a man was walking down this lane, because he would have had to walk from his hotel to the convention center, he was very aware that his mother, his sister, his daughter, grandchild, whoever, there was some symbol in that lane, in those women linked next to each other. There's a symbol that really spoke to him. You talked about songs, and this was a real golden age of women's clubs. There were a couple of women in 1868 that crossed through the country and talked about women organizing and organizing clubs. And they had social clubs. They had clubs that had to do with temperance, because they were very concerned about alcoholism. A lot of men came back from the Civil War addicted to alcohol. And of course, if you're addicted to alcohol, your paycheck doesn't go to take care of your family and your kids. So there were lots of these clubs. There was,
in fact, the first of these clubs, they did a little research, Ladies' Aid Society, 1874, it was formed here in Missouri. It was the very first women's organization ever.
Ever? I did not know that. That's, wow.
I mean, formed for suffrage, to achieve suffrage.
Oh, yeah, the first suffrage club was definitely one. And that's a real important point, Kevin, that women started making real headway when they started forming groups that focused on one issue. just one issue, and that was suffrage. Because before then, you know, the social clubs and such were pretty diverse. You would go to a social club and you might learn something about Wordsworth, a poet, you know, or you might learn something about art, or you might learn something about getting the vote. But when they finally formed a club that said, all we're going to work on is voting, they started to get some traction.
Now, to mansplain a little to you about that whole phenomena, Margot, there was also a lot of women's temperance leagues going on at this time, okay? And especially, this was contentious because St. Louis and a lot of Mississippi River towns are big brewing towns. So politically, it became a hot potato, temperance. And it's often, and it has been until the last couple of years, confused in my mind with the suffrage movement. I mean, they were contemporary. A lot of the same people belonged to the same organizations. And I think that men viewed them as a threat, not just to suffrage, but also to temperance, you know. And it's interesting that shortly after the Golden Lane, we passed Prohibition, so.
You are absolutely right. Well, you know, Prohibition actually passed before women got the vote. So,
Aha.
So, but you are absolutely right that the temperance movement was really ramping up at the same time, and even sometimes a little earlier than the suffrage movement. Sometimes women would start working on a temperance issue and then realize, oh, wait a second, if we had the vote, we maybe could do something else. But it's interesting that Prohibition passed before women got the vote.
Oh yeah, interesting.
Very interesting.
Margot McMillan's my guest. We're talking about the Golden Lane, how Missouri women gained the vote and changed history. Quite a dramatic demonstration occurred in St. Louis.
Well, you know, one of the things that happened, and I wish that the group could all see this, these two cartoons, and I will get them off to you if you send me a note that you want them. The first one has a fellow, you know, he's kind of a, I don't know, he looks a little humble to me. Looks like maybe he's a rural politician of some kind. He's got his hat in his hand, and he's kind of leaning over talking to this woman who's very well dressed and has a peppy smile on her face. And she says, "Are you for suffrage?" And he says, "Well, I am and I ain't." And that sidestepping sort of sums up what was going through these politicians at the time. They couldn't quite say that they were against it, but on the other hand, they couldn't step up and say they were for it. And then the other little cartoon here it was in the Ladies' Home Journal, and Grover Cleveland had written an article for the Ladies' Home Journal telling that, you know, talking about women's clubs, that he was against women's clubs. He had lots of information, so-called information about them. I'll just read you one of the quotes from his article. "Let it be here distinctly understood that no sensible man has fears of injury to the country on account of such participation. It is its dangerous undermining effect on the characters of the wives and mothers of our land that we fear." So of course, you know, women getting together was very dangerous in the mind of Grover Cleveland. And so this picture, this cartoon here, is Susan B. Anthony chasing him. She's got her umbrella. She's going to hit him over the head. He's running really fast, and tucked under his arm is a book that says "What I Know About Women's Clubs." So, you know, the cartoonists were kind of having a good time with this battle, I guess, and with the sort of that the powerful men were beginning to have to think a little bit. And I wanted to mention too, Kevin, that there was a lot of very organized, wonderful demonstrating going on. And this slide here is a diagram of a suffrage parade in 1908 in Washington, D.C.
This is brilliant.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was huge. It was huge. Thousands of women lined up, and they had categories so that you had women from Europe, in one area, you had famous women, the famous American women leading the parade. Lots of Missouri participation in it, and made a big difference. They were kind of picking up from images from art and from literature. The Joan of Arc, which was a book by Mark Twain, kind of has been a forgotten book. It's really the book that he thought was his best book, the one that he researched the most intently for. They picked up, and I wish you could see this, but their images on the catalog of their march is the same, very similar to the image on the cover of the Mark Twain book. So they've kind of learned, how to pick up these ideas. At this parade.
Just to jump back to the organization on that last, which kind of foreshadows the Golden Lane almost. The countries that had suffrage were represented like visibly in this demonstration, if you couldn't see it in the diagram. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. There were a lot of countries that had it. And one woman that I met actually in Kansas City, her grandmother had marched in the 1908 parade in Washington, D.C. And she said that, because I puzzled over this, how did they get women to come from, Holland or some country that was very far away to march in a parade? Well, it turned out that some of these, at least this woman's grandmother, had made a costume to look like she was, I can't remember what country, I think she was Belgian. So her costume looked like a Belgian woman.
Again,
and she marched in the
this is costuming as like tactic almost. It's some brilliant strategizing on the part of the organizers.
Well, right. And this, what happened at that parade, speaking of tactics, that was really had to do with Missouri, is we had a wonderful band in Maryville, Missouri, that was the only all-female band. They went to Washington, D.C., and at the beginning of the parade, there was a bunch of ruffians. So they were going to disrupt the parade, and one of this pictures on this slide shows them kind of, the parade is kind of falling apart because these ruffians are in there. Well, the band played all of their entire repertoire, and it was stunning to the crowd to see women with trombones or tubas or other brass instruments. Who knew? Not
uncommon in Missouri to this day. Go ahead.
That's right. So the women played their entire repertoire, and the ruffians were completely shocked and stymied, and this gave time for the cavalry that was at a nearby post near Washington, D.C. to come and to send the ruffians on their way so that the parade could proceed. So you see that whole parade depended on our Missouri Maryville band.
And also correct policing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, correct policing, that's right. As needed. So,
big demonstrations, very organized and very colorful and eye-catching. I mean, it's a shame there was not color photography back then, but there was a lot of illustration going on, a lot of attention to the pictorial, just coming into popular culture in the early 20th century, to a lot of the sense of the image.
Yeah, and they worked across, let's call it across the aisle. I don't know if that's how they thought of it, if that's how they would have said it, but the week before the Democratic convention in St. Louis was the Republican convention in Chicago. So the women had a big presence at both conventions, and the pictures that, again, I'll send you if you tell me that you want them. There's a woman with a couple of elephants, and the elephants have been painted with spots, and I wish I knew what color the spots were. They're probably yellow and white, maybe. Well, let's just pretend like they're yellow and white. And the elephants are carrying a plank that says Suffrage plank. And these elephants were at the convention in Chicago. There was an actual march in Chicago before their convention. But you know, the leaders of the movement thought that St. Louis was too conservative to have women marching. That's why the Golden Lane was so remarkable, because the women were standing in place. Like you called it, I think, a walkless, talkless parade. And that's
exactly. And you know, we spoke earlier of political cartoons, the commentary on both the demonstrations and the entire concept of suffrage. We have one that just kicks off the exhibition of, apparently when the Golden Lane, on the Golden Lane, men would like take the women's chairs, like, or you know, to take their places. And then the women, the cartoon is the woman saying, Mom, we should tell that woman that's where you were standing. And she's saying, let's wait till we get the vote. And then
they were, yeah, they I think that you're sort of illustrating a politeness that the St. Louis women, and that's something that Carrie Chapman Catt really recognized. She thought that the women in Missouri would be much more conservative and demure, I guess would be the word.
I think the idea of a walkless, talkless demonstration is probably, the time has come again for something like that. Just, you know, something about that space, you know, the Tessa witness, just to witness something like that, both as an observer and as a participant, you know, as a witness for yourself.
Yeah, there's a guy named Auerbach he lives in Illinois and he studies nonviolent demonstrations. He thinks that the Golden Lane was the first nonviolent demonstration ever. And, you know, we can certainly know that it preceded Martin Luther King and Gandhi and any of the others that we know the names of. But it's very possible that, yeah, it might have been the first nonviolent demonstration.
All right, so it's time for the Democratic Convention.
Okay.
St. Louis is the locale. We're having it in one of the biggest arenas in the world, probably, right?
Yeah, the world's largest arena is in St. Louis.
I'm not surprised. I just guessed that, but I'm not surprised. We're just after the fair, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of the fair buildings still available. St. Louis has got a lot of zhuzh going, okay? But once again, you're saying they're a little bit more, they're not Chicago as far as like feisty. They need something a little, and so they came up with this concept. Who did, and how did it happen?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of times people are curious, like, how did they get all these 3,000 women to St. Louis to do this demonstration? And I've had people say, how did they do this before the internet? One of their strategies, they had really gotten good about using the media. And one of their strategies, they decided they would get a donkey to stand in front of their office. They had gotten a bit of an office in St. Louis that they were going to use for setup, so that if somebody, like, let's say you were from Denver and you wanted to come and be at the Golden Lane, but you didn't have enough money to buy a hotel room, they would help you find a house to stay in. They were organizing food for people who were visiting and organizing transportation and that kind of thing. So they wanted a donkey to stand in front of this office.
And we should mention too that there was even, St. Louis wasn't dormant. There was even a magazine, correct? That 1916, I think it started. The Missouri Woman.
Yeah.
Missouri Woman.
We'll get to her.
Okay, sorry.
But I just wanted to tell, because I love the donkey. You know, I'm a donkey person anyway. I have donkeys. But so they found a donkey. They found a donkey that would work out just great, but it was in Illinois. So they decided, okay, we're gonna bring this donkey to Missouri. Well, they couldn't get it to cross the Eads Bridge, which, if you've ever been around a donkey,
it was walking.
If you've ever known a donkey, you would say,
they don't like bridges. Yeah.
We'd never get it across the Eads Bridge. But you see, what was cool about this is that they had the St. Louis Star, which was a big newspaper at the time, following their donkey, trying to get their donkey. You know, they were running pictures of all of the events. Well, they finally got a donkey out of Missouri. They got the donkey to the right place, and the St. Louis Star ran a picture of the women with their donkey. So they were having a good time. You know, it wasn't just all gloom and doom and
Silence.
and unhappiness. Yeah, right. Now this is the Missouri Woman. This is the magazine.
Oh.
1917, and the State Historical Society has this magazine on microfilm. I don't know if you still have the hard.
Part of the exhibition.
Is it there? Oh,
Well, there's a reproduction, yeah.
I can't wait till you can open that exhibit for us, because the Missouri Woman, any woman who's watching this video right now, or this presentation right now, would have subscribed to the Missouri Woman. They had club news. They had jokes, they had recipes, they had articles on your rights. You know, women did have a few rights at the time, a little bit of inheritance rights and such. So it was just a real all-purpose women's magazine, and it went all over the state. It carried school news from schools all over the state. So that's the Missouri Woman, and it had great artistry. The editor in later days was Mary Semple Scott, and she was just brilliant at design. So you can see this sort of, you can't probably see the music that's written under this, but anyone who was a woman in 1917 could probably, a good majority of us could read music at the time. I'm so sad that we can't anymore, and would have looked at this and parsed it out and realized it was reveille. It's call to action. Get up, let's wake up, you guys. It's reveille, time to move. The other image here is an advertisement for Sticks, Bear and Fuller, which is a real well-known department store to our Missouri women. And Sticks, Bear and Fuller got on board in an interesting way. They imported hundreds and hundreds of those yellow parasols that we saw in the first slide, and we're selling them at a very reduction. But you know, every woman, I don't care who we are, wants to fit in. And so it was good to know that you had the right parasol and the right costume, and you were ready for the demonstration. They used some language that, you know, this was on the cusp of World War I, and a lot of them were pacifists, but they used some language in their recruiting to get women on board. And here's an advertisement that is from one of the magazines. Wanted, it was from the Missouri Woman, wanted 10,000 women recruits. If you believe in women's suffrage, you believe a woman's vote can help your country, city, home, your children, or yourself, enlist now. And you could fill out a little form and send it in, and they would know that you were coming to the Golden Lane. One of the things that caught my eye out of this advertisement is the quote that says, "Help us make this demonstration so big and beautiful that Missouri will be proud of its women, and that the delegates to the convention cannot fail to feel the force of the plea for votes for women."
I never heard a clearer strategy for a demonstration than that, really. Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to antagonize the people you're trying to convince, especially if they're men. I mean, really, take it from me.
Yeah. Well, you would know. So this is one of my, I guess maybe my last slide. This is one of my favorite pictures of the Golden Lane, and it comes from the archive of Carrie Chapman Catt, which is at Bryn Mawr College. And it kind of shows the march from the men's point of view. You know, the guys, so if you were a Democrat and you were going to the convention, you went with your club, you would with a, Detroit club or the Cleveland club or whichever club, whatever town you were from. And you all marched kind of in a formation. You wore the same clothes. It wasn't like you were wearing a uniform, but you had the same kind of hat and you had the same kind of jacket. And so here's a picture kind of from the rear of one of these clubs is marching along ahead, and the women lined up on the side watching them. And there's some great reminiscences from the women where they would say that the men, they just looked straight ahead at first. They wouldn't meet their eyes. They were sort of overwhelmed and maybe a little embarrassed by this show of the silent women. And then little by little, maybe somebody kind of stole a glance to the side and caught somebody's eye, and maybe there was a little flirting going on, and a little bit of jokiness, and kind of, you know, having some fun with it. So that's one of my favorite thoughts about it, was that it kind of turned into something fun. Another great thing about this particular picture, and Kevin, you mentioned this a little bit before, is there's a tavern sign that's visible kind of in the foreground of this. It's a Green Tree beer, and it reminds us, of course, we've never heard of Green Tree beer because it doesn't exist anymore, but there were really hundreds of breweries in St. Louis at the time, a very, very powerful lobby in St. Louis that, as you said, the women were coming up against.
A monumental demonstration. I mean, literally, it looks monumental. Even from these black and white dated photographs, you can tell what an impression this must have made. Silence changed everything. I like that. And like I say, you know, this isn't just about women getting the vote. It's also about the disenfranchisement of voters in general, and how easy it is to ignore the people that you've left out of the process that controls what we do, correct? Absolutely. That's very well said. Margot McMillan's been my guest. She's the author of The Golden Lane, How Missouri Women Gained the Vote and Changed History. Before we get to a couple questions, Margot, you know, I know you're a big Twain fan and you're working on that Twain book. How did he fit into this? I mean, in your thinking?
You know, it's funny that you say that, because I do have a little recording of a Twain quote that I think it was always a surprise to me to hear how his opinion really changed. I'll just play it. This is a quote this is a letter to the editor that he wrote in 1867. You know, right around the Civil War. He lived in St. Louis at the time. His family was in St. Louis. His mother, sister, sister-in-law, all of his family was there, partly for safety, you know, to get to the city during the war, and partly just through happenstance that they all just happened to be there at the same time. Let me just play you this recording if I can make it happen.
Mark Twain.
I think I could write a pretty strong argument in favor of female suffrage, but I do not want to do it. I never want to see the women voting and gabbling about politics and electioneering. There's something revolting in the thought. Women, go your ways. Seek not to beguile us of our imperial privileges. Content yourself with your little feminine trifles, your babies, your benevolent societies, and your knitting, and let your natural bosses do the voting. Stand back. You will be wanting to go to war next. We will let you teach school as much as you want to, and we'll pay you half wages for it too, but beware, we don't want you to crowd us too much.
Here was the Coliseum in St. Louis at the time of the Democratic Convention.
It's now a expressway, it's part of the highway system. I don't think there's anything actually on the site.
I think it's where all the 40, 44 and all that stuff at the bottom of it, that's where it all converges down there. That wasn't the levee yet, but it was certainly probably that end of downtown. Yeah.
Right. It's been a while since I've looked at the map, but the Jefferson Hotel is still there. Wow. And Locust Street it's really remarkable. I did a talk on a bookstore in Locust Street, and I was really surprised at how many of the same buildings were there that were there in 100 years ago. So it's worth a walk. I don't believe there's a monument. There was not when I was there, and I've never heard that there has been one put up. It seems to me it's a great place to put a monument.
Another question is, was the Golden Lane an integrated event?
That's such a good question. There were a few Black participants. And at the time, when I've read such things as club notes, that kind of thing, I've seen where white women did go to Black clubs and do presentations about suffrage. My impression is, and I'm hopeful, I had before the COVID thing struck, I had a presentation lined up with a Black partner. We were going to talk about both sides, and I was really anxious to hear what she had to say, but unfortunately it was canceled. There was some Black participation. My impression is that there were so many things on the plate of the Black citizen at the time that they couldn't give it 100%. I mean, they were working with education for one. I think that was the primary problem, were their schools for their kids.
One issue, right? Right?
Huh?
Concentrate on one issue at a time. You said
Yeah.
that earlier.
Yes, exactly. And
Black women
there's
were busy getting basic rights, I guess.
Yeah, there's another point to be made, Kevin, and that is that society was even more fragmented than it is now. And so if you look through the names of the women who were involved, you very, very rarely see anything except Anglo or British Isle names. So you don't see too many German names. You would expect to see a lot of French women from St. Louis. Really, there weren't. So I think we see everything through the lens of black or white right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that 100 years ago, our society was even more fragmented than that.
Margot, actually, one of her specialities is French-speaking Missourians, correct? You were
Nice.
Yeah. Margot, just a couple other questions. We're going to give out your email and contact info because we have a couple people asking about the slideshow and they'd like to take a look at that. Also, about the Planters Hotel, how does that figure into the march? Do you know?
Ooh, tell me.
I have no idea. That's Carol Davis McDonald said, I heard about the Planters Hotel and how does this figure into the march? We'll see if we can dig up an answer and get it back to her.
We would love to know. I know the men were mostly staying at the Jefferson, so I'm not even sure I know where the Planters Hotel is.
Richard Mueller says the Coliseum was at the corner of Jefferson and Washington Avenues, which was a lot north of where I thought it was. The Jefferson Bank was built on this site. And as Charles Sweeney points out, Locust was an east-west street. So yeah, the Coliseum would be at, I guess, what would be the north or the eastern end of it. And the bank has since relocated and it's on the western edge of downtown, according to Mr. Mueller.
So is there enough room there to put a little pocket park and with a little plaque?
We should. As a matter of fact, someone in here, Leslie, says, I think all of us would love to donate for your proposed monument. Please email me if I may contribute.
Let's do it.
Well, you know how to do it. We just laid out the whole strategy sheet for you. You know, it only takes 150 years or so, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Margot, thanks so much for joining us. And I look forward to walking you through this exhibition myself and hearing your thoughts on some of the objects, clothing, etc. And also, I'd like to mention Margot's radio show, Farm and Fiddle, is on every Wednesday. It streams at kopn.org. And you can access all kinds of material at the State Historical Society website. It's shsmo.org. And there is just a ton of stuff there. Work's been done over the last year and a half on the site that's made it into something really extraordinary and fun to visit. Just the political cartoons alone, if your kids are interested in history, what actually happened day to day, you can pick out any newspaper you want and start strolling through their political cartoons. I thank you again, Margot.
Thank you, Kevin. It was great.